So, good morning, everyone. This morning, I want to talk about a very common experience for all of us, which is anger. And as you know, it's a complex, multifaceted emotion. It's often misunderstood or misinterpreted, and it's viewed, at least in our culture, as inherently negative. But I would argue that anger is neither good nor bad. It's just simply a natural part of being human, and that it really consists of an energy that arises in us when we feel threatened, when we feel hurt, when our sense of justice has been violated, and on and on. But it's how we choose to engage with this energy we call anger, which determines whether it's a source, a destructive force, a source of suffering, or can be a profound teacher. So this morning, I want us to dig a little deeper into anger, looking at its roots, looking at its effects, looking at ways to transform it into a tool for greater self-awareness and personal growth. And that really aligns with the Buddha's teachings because he encourages us, as you know, to approach all emotions, and this includes anger, of course, with curiosity, with mindfulness, and with compassion. And through this lens, through the lens of the Buddhist teachings, um, we can look at some of the insights which he offered and try to expand upon his wisdom as we wrestle with this emotion in our daily lives. Anger, in its essence, is a signal. It is a flag. It is something that says, pay attention. It arises to alert us that something within us or around us needs attention. So perhaps a boundary has been crossed or violated, a value's been threatened, a wound has been triggered, something's been thrown in our way that's frustrating. At this point, anger arises to signal us that something needs to change. It's a red flag that something is off. And very often, the source of that is the ego, our good old friend, the ego. And this insight aligns with the Buddhist practices of especially mindfulness, which which ask us to observe our emotions, all of our emotions, without judgment, and see them as messengers trying to convey something to get our attention rather than enemies. Usually we treat anger as an enemy. But because when anger arises, it is tempting to direct it outward, to blame others, to blame circumstances, to blame the universe for our discomfort. But the problem with that is, and that's the default for most of us, that's the sort of natural response. But doing so prevents us from looking at its root causes. Because the Buddha reminds us that the true source of our suffering comes from within. So this is from the Dhammapada, that short collection of the Buddha's sayings, and he says, quote, "We are shaped by our thoughts, we become what we think. When the mind is pure, joy follows like a shadow that never leaves," end quote. We are shaped by our thoughts, we become what we think. When the mind is pure, joy follows like a shadow that never leaves, end quote. Anger, similarly, arises from the mind's conditioning. Its fears, its insecurities, our attachments, our triggers, on and on. And the example, for those of you that were here on Saturday, that I shared about getting a little snarky on the phone with the veterinarian staff, was from my ego sense of entitlement being violated, not a skillful response. I thought, I felt entitled that they shouldn't be treating me this way or with this kind of inconvenience. I was caught up in believing that. That's my ego. That's my ego saying, what's going on here? Why are you doing this? It's only through inward reflection that we can begin to understand and transform it. If I just continue to be snarky and striking out, they're upset, I'm upset, we suffer, I suffer, they suffer, nothing gets done. Which is why noticing and pausing is so important, especially when it comes to anger. We need to understand at the outset the seductive nature of anger. it is very seductive because it can bring us a sense of empowerment. It can make us in a situation where we're feeling diminished or dismissed or small. It can empower us. It can make us feel stronger. So rather than feel diminished by the vet's mistake and my sense of inconvenience, I felt empowered by my irritation. A very seductive, if unskillful emotion. And that's where my snarkiness came from, that feeling empowered that they had inconvenienced me, or that I was inconvenienced. They didn't intentionally set out to inconvenience me. When we feel wronged or diminished, anger can restore a sense of control and righteousness, and that's part of the seduction. It's very attractive. This rush of adrenaline that comes with it can be intoxicating. But remember that the Buddha warned us about clinging, the dangers of clinging to such emotions as anger, because they can easily spiral into delusion such as, I'm special, I deserve to be treated differently than their policies even state, and then harm results. Even righteous, so-called righteous anger, while seemingly justified, often blinds us to the humanity of others. It really brings us all back into the ego. I'm not really thinking about them and their day and their policies and their, challenges. It's all about me. It creates this dualistic mindset of I am right and they are wrong. And all that does is increase our separation from each other and reinforces the ego's sense of specialness. It's always there to want us to feel special. The Buddha taught that attachment to this sense of self, this ego, this clinging to the I, the me, the mine, is a primary root of our suffering. And when anger results from a personal affront, the experience of a personal affront, it clouds our judgment. It puts blinders on us. It keeps us from seeing the bigger picture. It shuts down our ability to listen, to empathize, and to respond skillfully. Shantideva, who I quote here often, he was an 8th century Indian Buddhist monk, very wise person, and he wrote on these matters. And one of his more famous publications is called The Way of the Bodhisattva, in which he says, quote, all the harm with which this life is rife, all fear and suffering there is, clinging to the I has caused it. What am I to do with this great demon? Again, all the harm with which this world is rife, all fear and suffering that there is, clinging to the I that caused it. What am I to do with this great demon? Close quote. He reminds us that anger, when fueled by the I, when fueled by the ego and self-righteousness, becomes a destructive force. To overcome it, we have to rein in the I, cultivate a sense of interconnection, see the big picture, put some spaciousness around it. Rather than suppressing our anger, which is not a solution either, any more than extending it outward, we pursue the middle path, as we always do. And that means we meet our anger with curiosity and self-awareness. We start with noticing it, then we bring some curiosity to it and some self-awareness to it. And this aligns with the Buddhist teachings, which emphasize the importance of mindfulness in working with difficult emotions, which is why we notice and we pause. We try to catch it. We use the anger, we use the physical response, which anger manifests as a flag to pay attention, so that we observe anger as it arises. We notice its physical sensations, and they're always there: the tightness, the clenching the jaw, the kind of feeling in the midriff here. Its triggers, where's that coming from? Typically go to the ego is the first place, because 9 times out of 10, that's the source, and then its underlying causes. Because by holding space for our anger without judgment, we create conditions for healing. We recognize in this process the importance of self-compassion. And when we judge ourselves, remembering that when we judge ourselves for feeling angry, we're only adding to our suffering. Oh, I'm a bad person. I shouldn't have done that. With the vet the other day, oh, I was beating myself up. our old friend, the second arrow. The alternative is treating ourselves with kindness, recognizing that anger is a natural response to the conditions that I talked about earlier, emotional pain, feeling diminished, the ego being wounded, and accept that that's just the way things are. As Rumi so eloquently wrote about emotions in general, especially the problematic ones in his poem The Guest House, he says, quote, "Welcome and entertain them all. Even if they're a crowd of sorrows, still treat each guest honorably." He's talking about emotions here. Welcome and entertain them all. Even if they're a crowd of sorrows, still treat each guest honorably. He's saying, welcome in our emotions, don't judge them, invite them in for a cup of tea. And the practice of welcoming our emotions, especially our so-called negative emotions, with compassion is at the heart of the Buddha's teachings, because it allows us to hold our suffering more tenderly, creating the space for insight, creating the space for greater freedom. One of the most profound teachings that Shantideva recommended in his book is the practice of what he called remaining like a log. Remaining like a log. What he's saying there is that he's encouraging us to pause when anger arises and resist the urge to react impulsively. Now, we all know that can happen in the wink of an eye. This is not an easy practice because the time between the trigger and the outburst is tiny. So it really requires our effort to put that noticing and that pause in there. But by remaining still and silent, we create enough of a gap between the stimulus and the response, which allows some wisdom to arise, some insight to arise. Now, again, this is not about suppressing our anger. We're not stuffing it down, but we're creating space for some reflection on it. You know, in the heat of anger, when I've been triggered, my thoughts and emotions can become overwhelming, like a wildfire consuming everything in its path. We just burn everything down. But by noticing and pausing, we create an opportunity for those flames, those wildfire flames, to subside. And we can then gain some clarity from which we can respond more skillfully. This is the essence of the Buddhist teachings on non-reactivity. He says we want to seek to respond to life's challenges with equanimity and wisdom, and remind ourselves in this process that anger is not our enemy to be defeated, but a teacher to be embraced. What can we learn when we pay attention to what triggers our anger? All kinds of things about who we are, all kinds of things about our ego's vulnerability. When we approach anger with mindfulness and compassion, it becomes a doorway to self-discovery and growth. It helps reveal our unmet needs, our unhealed wounds, and our deepest values. Let me say that again, because that's really the essence of this. When we come in anger with mindfulness and compassion, it reveals our unmet needs, and that includes all the ego's needs, our unhealed wounds, which easily get triggered, and our deepest values, which are violated often when we get angry. By working with anger more skillfully, we have to recognize it's going to happen. It's going to come up. But when we work with it more skillfully, we transform it from a source of suffering to a source of wisdom and true empowerment. The Buddha taught that all our emotions, even those that have the potential to cause suffering, have the potential to awaken us. Anger, when understood and transformed, can become a force for positive change. It inspires us to address injustices, to set healthy boundaries, and to advocate for those causes and values that we care about. You know, it is a wake-up call to correct wrongs in the world, to create it, to address injustices. But it requires patience, practice, and inner work. but we remember in this process that anger, like all emotions, is impermanent. Even when I got triggered the other day, it passed. I mean, it would have passed whether I tried to address it or not. And through this practice, we learn that it lingers and passes away. Our task is not to resist it, repress it, or indulge it, but meet it with awareness and compassion. And by doing that, we begin to free ourselves from the chains of reactivity. We discover the peace that lies at the heart of our being. So, so let me leave you with this thought. I'm not sure who said this, but I think it's full of wisdom. Feeling the feeling is where the healing begins. Feeling the feeling is where the healing begins. My guess is it probably comes out of 12 steps, but I couldn't find the source of it. When we allow ourselves to feel anger fully, without reacting to it, without judging it, without resistance, we open the door to healing it and directing it in a more constructive way. This is the path of the Buddha, the path of mindfulness and compassion, and the path to freedom. So let me just close with this wish for all of us, which is, may we walk this path with courage and grace, transforming our anger into wisdom and our suffering into peace. So those are some thoughts this morning on working with anger.